As we know, America is going through a major transit this year. It's Pluto return. There is 3 times that Pluto in the transiting sky will have a direct hit of the same degree minute, the same degree second of where Pluto was in 1776 when America declared its independence. And I want to explore the optimistic potentials of this moment for America and for the rebirth that Pluto can often represent. So just to start here, many astrologers are very much focused on the negative side of the Pluto return, and I think it has been intense. We've seen already in 2022 all of the changes and the upheavals and the economics and the inflation, on all of the stuff I've been talking about recently. But in this video, I want to focus more on maybe the positive side, and I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into the history of Pluto, this whole Pluto cycle with respect to America, and I think we can learn some of the shifts that will be beneficial that are set to arrive as a result of this Pluto return. So first it's worth mentioning that it's 3 direct hits. We have the 20 February hit. That was the first pass. Now Pluto is retrograde, and on 11 July, so here in 4 or 5 days, it'll make the second pass. And when Pluto moves direct later in the year, it will hit on 28 December, the 3rd and final pass of the America-Pluto return. And of course, this is based on the US chart. I use the Sibly chart. There was a British astrologer, Ebenezer Sibly, I believe was his name, who came up with this chart. It's been played with and utilized and rectified by many astrologers. Dane Rudhyar even rectified it. But we're dealing with the Sagittarius rising. In this chart, the one thing I want to point out is that the sign of Capricorn comprises the 2nd house in the Sibly chart. And that's where Pluto is, in the 2nd house of the Sibly chart. Well, what's the 2nd house? And to answer that quickly, I'll turn to the book by H.S. Green, Raphael, and Charles Carter, or CEO Carter. There's a book called Mundane Astrology, the Astrology of Nations and States, where they each have a sector of that book. And I really love this book for some of the basics of mundane astrology can be found here. Raphael's section includes his breakdown of the houses, and he talks about the 2nd house being the national exchequer. That would be like the Secretary of the Treasury in America. Revenue, the stock market or stock exchange, banks, commercial affairs, and trade. We find this in natal astrology as well. It's the resources available. And so when we come back to Sibly, we think about that 2nd house as where the activity will be focused on. And I want to come back to Kieron legrice, the archetypal cosmos. He has this little chart with Pluto, this section where he talks about the primal power of creation of Pluto and the sense of rebirth. That Pluto not only is destruction, but it's then being reborn and recreated into something maybe more fundamental. And so just to think about it, we have this opportunity now. America's got a Pluto return in the 2nd house, recreating and being reborn around themes of finance. And it's funny because I simply was doing some research recently, and the way into any of this research is you do an examination of this Pluto cycle. So this is one full Pluto cycle that's coming to an end here in 2022. Well, we look at hard aspects. This is a fundamental principle of any kind of cycle work. When was the square, the opening square, the opposition, the closing square, and then that final conjunction? And in this case, it's very clear that you get these certain sectors of history. So we'll look at 1848, 49, 50. We'll look at 36, 37, 1936, 37, 1982, that closing square, Pluto and Libra, and then where we are now. But just those 3 periods are going to tell us a lot about what we might be expecting here as a result of this Pluto return. And so let's just start here with the opening square. The initial chart, there's not much to say. We have the birth of a new nation. Some of it was economic. The economics behind the founding of the new country and the disputes over taxation. So that's sort of embedded here in the nativity, having Pluto in the 2nd. The kind of core issue might be economic. But let's start here in 1849, 1848. When I do this research, it's very useful to keep an open mind. You just put in dates. I go to Wikipedia usually as a starting place and just see what was going on in the official narratives and the official records. 1848 through 1855 is the California Gold Rush. The big deal that was happening. A lot of the stories that I was reading about in 1848 and 1849 were relating to this. And so this was when gold was found in California, and it radically changed the economy. A huge influx of gold. The paper money was backed by gold, but there was a massive influx. When you discover new gold, there's more money into the money supply. It had a huge rejuvenating and revitalizing effect on the American economy and even the global economy. You see articles like this Gerald D. Nash paper on JSTOR, A Veritable Revolution, the Global Economic Significance of the California Gold Rush. He says in the language of economists, it served as a multiplier, an event that accelerated a chain of interrelated consequences, all which accelerated economic growth. And so there you go, it's the rebirth and the renewal economically as a result of events that took place during that opening Pluto square. And now the second date is all the way almost 100 years later, 1937. Pluto has an irregular orbit through Taurus, Gemini, and into Cancer. It takes a long, long time just to go through those three signs. And so it's almost 100 years later. 1937, that final pass of the Pluto opposition that America went through. What was going on in 1937? Obviously the Great Depression, so it was a huge economic issue again, the opposition, coming back to that Sibly Pluto in the second house. But you just punch it up and everything is about the New Deal. All through 36 and 37, there are the reforms that happened in America around the economy, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a series of programs and public works projects and financial reforms and regulations, the New Deal during the Pluto opposition. Key takeaways, this is from Investopedia.com. It helped revitalize the U.S. economy following the Great Depression. Again, this same theme, revitalization of the U.S. economy during a Pluto hard aspect to the natal Pluto in the Sibly chart. And we still have the legacy here with Social Security. This is still in place. And then we come to 83, we get the closing square. This was in August 83 was that final pass. What's going on in 1983? Well, it's interesting because I type it in and there was a recession in the early 80s, a big recession, a global recession. It's starting in 83 that the world comes out of it and the global expansion that happens for a whole host of reasons. Some economists call it the Reagan Boom of 82 through 97. So in the aftermath of that Pluto closing square, you get an economic boom. And if you can pull up charts of the stock market, it's just straight up basically into the dot-com bubble from the early 80s. And so it's this expansionary rebirth that happens, a revitalization, if you will, during the closing Pluto square. This is an article from 1997, Martin Anderson. He talks about the U.S. economy growing almost 4% in the fourth quarter, inflation low, interest rates low, job creation continues at a steady pace. Other commentators, so this is a website, American History website. By 1983, the economy had rebounded and the United States entered into one of the longest periods of sustained economic growth since World War II. That's happening here right as that closing Pluto square completes. Here's where I want to do the interlude. I mean, there's a whole conversation to be had about in any economic system, the people that are exploited, diminished, genocide, right, can happen as a result of economic activity. That's a whole nother side to this story. Gold rush created genocide of Native Americans. Because there was a rush to expand in the zones where they were living, and so it accelerated that process. Well, the New Deal in 1937 is thought of as boosting the lower classes, but certainly there's always losers. There's people that don't want to go along with the system. There's people that say, I don't want to participate. There's those that are exploited by the system. In the 80s, of course, this same period that they're calling a boom also is a period with expansions in the gap between rich and poor. So that's part of that growth here. There was many losers. I mean, I talked to my family even, 70s, 60s, everybody went to college, low price, you could get a home, you could get a car. So wages did not increase with inflation like the stock market rises did. So there's this gap between the rich and poor. So that's a whole conversation. I wanted just to interject it here because it's not lost to me that that's part of what's going on. This video's purpose isn't to do a deep dive into that. It's just to lay out more general economic history. And so that it brings us back to today and what's happening with the global economy. Well, up until the making of this video, 2022 has seen a destruction of a lot of markets, a lot of selling in the stock market and the crypto market and the bond market. There's all kinds of events that have taken place that have created economic issues, and namely the inflation issue is huge on everyone's mind. Cost of living crisis. But the other part of this year, so that's going on, but the other part of this year is that there's this massive discussion of central bank digital currencies that the Federal Reserve is having, that the Bank of International Settlements is having. And I think that's the kind of revitalization that is about to be installed in the American economic system. So look for that in the wake of this Pluto return completing. So into 2023, 2024, 2025, Pluto will be in Aquarius for good by then. I think we're going to have a whole new structure of a system that very well may support economic expansion out from this moment of economic crisis. So this is kind of a video saying the Pluto return may support a kind of a bullish turn in the economy going forward. And so stay optimistic. I mean, keeping in mind Pluto is rebirth. We're being reborn into something more profound and more fundamental. So keep your optimism out there is a major point of this video. And so, yeah, talk soon. Have a wonderful Pluto return year, 2022. Plan economically, but set yourself up for maybe periods where there's more expansion coming later in this decade.